Thank you very much, and it's great to be here again. I mean, I might just start by saying that a lot of the discussion that I've heard here is very similar to that we have back in London. So we are the only other law enforcement organisation that hasn't had its pay increase for this year, and all the issues that John raised about how that feels then for the workforce, we share, and they really are. I mean, they are very stark. And it is absolutely the money that people need to get by, but also the feeling of being valued or not being valued that not getting a pay rise gives you. And then the well-being points as well. I mean, there's just an awful lot recruitment and retention that is the same, and that's something I think we need to make sure we are continuing to do with PSNI, and really in support of the board as well, as making sure you're not just looking at an organisation in isolation, but you can see how retention data, for example, compares with other police forces or other organisations, because there are a lot of things that are happening across all of society, and it's important to look at it in context, I think. Anyway, sorry, slight segue. Really good to be back. It was good as well to have Joanne, who's just disappeared, and Brendan and Janet in London for a kind of visit to the National Crime Agency headquarters and just talk about some of our capabilities there. Pleased to have put before you this for this meeting a slightly different report to the one that we've done before. So, I mean, it looks and feels different, I think, but also covers 6 months rather than a quarter. So you've got one report since I was last here rather than two. Really welcome some feedback from you on whether that is answering the questions you would have. I mean, I'm sure it will raise new questions as well, but the format of the report, does it work for you? One thing that we'll put into future reports that your Human Rights Advisor, John Wadham, has been asking us for is some commentary on human rights and how we make sure we abide by them in our work here or on behalf of Northern Ireland. So we will definitely do that in future reports. Sorry not to be able to do it this time. In terms of what the report says, I mean, it sets out our strategy. I ran through that at the last board meeting, but the two key elements for here being our role in leading the system and making sure we are doing that better, the operational system, on behalf of everyone in law enforcement, and then our own operational activity and making sure that we are focusing that as much as we can on the most harmful organised crime groups affecting the UK, including Northern Ireland, and doing that by going, as we've called it, upstream, overseas and online. That does and is having real impact here in Northern Ireland. So, for example, the big seizure in September that the Garda made just off the coast of Ireland of 2 tons of cocaine was an operation that we had worked with them on, and was intelligence that had come out of, I won't go into where the intelligence came from, but intelligence that allowed us to identify and track the boat that was coming. That was cocaine that would have come into the Republic, but absolutely Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK as well. Work that we are doing on litazines, and I'd like to come back in that in questions maybe rather than in introductions, is really important. Work on money laundering, trying to tackle some of the big international groups that are laundering the money that is made throughout the UK, including in Northern Ireland, and we made some real progress and some big arrests and disruptions around that. And another topic that's come up frequently in these discussions around fraud and the total level of fraud. When we look at the macro figures on fraud that is reported by the public, our best data set is actually England and Wales rather than the UK as a whole, but it's probably representative. That feels like it's turned a corner. So the last 3 quarters have shown a downward trend in the total number of fraud. Now, that isn't just NCA activity at all. That has been a cross multi-agency work, and I think that telco companies have done a good job in turning the corner there, but it's beginning to come down. In terms of our report on what's happening, you'll have seen a slight shift, which is what we said we were trying to do, our tilt into focusing more on the major and moderate disruptions and on the most significant groups, and you'll have seen those have grown. And as I suggested would happen, you'll also seen a slight reduction in the minor disruptions. So we've been trying to tilt the organisation's effort into the more important investigations and jobs, and that is beginning to happen. I mean, it's just a 1 6-month snapshot, so we need to see it play out for a bit longer before we can be absolutely sure it's a trend. On the individual threats within it, you'll have seen an increase in drugs and guns, and a bit of money laundering in the kind of certainly the major disruptions that we have been having. Cyber and fraud, relatively stable. It's actually harder to tie some of our major disruptions to Northern Ireland. I mean, they're for everyone. But for the ones that we can tie to Northern Ireland, relatively stable. Child sexual exploitation, modern slavery and human trafficking have gone down a bit over the last 6 months, as you'll have seen. That said, the disseminations that we've passed on to intelligence disseminations that we've passed on through PSNI are still really high, 181 in the last 6 months period, which have led to 39 arrests and 90 children being safeguarded. So that figure is actually slightly higher than the previous 6 months. You may want to ask me a question on that, because Meta have made an announcement today about end-to-end encryption, which I think is going to see that figure come down in the future, which is really worrying to us. Finally, just in terms of our specific Northern Ireland work, Simon and I talked at the last board about the discussions we'd been having about how we wanted to focus our work, and we picked 3 priorities for NCA and PSNI joint working. And those were to identify and go after high-value targets, whoever they were, but including paramilitaries. Secondly, to make sure we were doing as much as we could around asset recovery, with a particular focus around paramilitaries. We covered a bit of that earlier on. And thirdly, to make sure we were going after fugitives overseas, so people who have been arrested, where there was a charge against them in Northern Ireland, but they've absconded, and how we can go after them overseas. So we've made progress to differing extents on all 3 of those, which I can cover in questions, but it's in the report a bit. Final point, John and I have been reflecting since his appointment, and we're not disagreeing with those priorities, but we are going to take stock and just have a foot on the ball moment once John's properly got his feet under the table, and just make sure they are right, see if we want to refocus them. So we will look at that again. That's it as introduction.
Okay, thank you, Graham.